Good morning. My name is Chris Vertefeuille, and I have the pleasure this morning of interviewing Nell Jessup Newton, the Dean of the University of Connecticut School of Law, the first female law school dean in Connecticut. Today is May 23rd, 2006. I'm conducting this interview as part of the Connecticut Bar Foundation James W. Cooper Fellows Oral History of Connecticut Women in the Legal Profession project. This project is sponsored by the Connecticut Bar Foundation. Good morning, Nell.
Good morning, Christine.
I'm going to start by asking your full name.
Nell Jessup Newton.
And your date and place of birth.
I was born April 30th, 1944 in St. Louis, Missouri.
I'm going to start with some questions about your background. Can you tell us a little bit about your parents, their occupations?
My father was a salesperson who left the family very early in my life, leaving us alone with our mother. We were mainly raised by our grandparents. My mother worked as a secretary when she was able to work, and my grandparents were retired, so that we had quite an itinerant upbringing.
And you had siblings?
I had two brothers, my older brother Rob and my younger brother Fred. My brother Rob died of lymphoma in 1994, and my brother Fred is still alive and well, has run 2 restaurants, and is currently a contractor. My older brother was an academic, as was I. He was a urban and regional planning professor at the University of Illinois in Chicago, and he also served as the Commissioner for Economic Development for the entire city of Chicago during Harold Washington's term as mayor.
And your surviving brother, his occupation?
He is currently a contractor. Okay. He found the restaurant business never left him time to be with his son, so he decided he would go into a business that would give him a little more family time.
And have you any members of your family involved in the law?
I had an uncle who was an attorney, but that's about it.
Now, as a child, did you have any inkling that you might be interested in the law?
When I was a child, women were not to be lawyers. In the Midwest, in the culture in which I grew up, which was Irish, German, Catholic, Midwestern culture, I never had any idea that women could be attorneys. I thought that women could be nurses, they could be teachers, they could, of course, be married. That was number one. And I think my grandfather's idea was that I would care for him in his old age. So it never occurred to me that law was a career for me, but I was always interested in academics, excelled in academics, and perhaps early on, as I used to get into trouble with the nuns at my grade school, it occurred to me that my talent for disputation might someday stand me in good stead in my career.
Now, where did you grow up?
I grew up we lived for a while in western Michigan, in rural Michigan in the Manistee Forest. And then we moved in with our grandparents in Kirkwood, Missouri, which is a suburb outside of St. Louis. And we lived either with our grandparents or in other close-in suburbs of St. Louis as we were growing up from about the time I was 7 years old.
And I think from what you said earlier, you were educated in parochial school?
Yes, I went to parochial school, and then when I was to be a sophomore, I had my first big fight with my grandfather when I said I wanted to go to the public school because I felt that the parochial school that I attended, the high school, which was a very good high school for young girls, had no science classes, had no math classes, and was a very stifling atmosphere. And if truth be told, I heard there were boys at the public school, so I thought that might be a more interesting place to go.
And did you
and
go
I
to
did.
the public
I went
school?
to Brentwood High School and had a very good experience there.
Now, did you work at all while you were attending high school?
Yes, because we had no money. I began working when I was 14 and a half, and I worked steadily. I think I have never been without a job since that age.
And at that high school, during those times, did you have any role models?
It's always difficult for women of my age to find role models. It's an interesting question. When you think of role models in the formal sense, of people who are formally going to mentor you. No. In fact, the guidance counselor, despite the fact that I had astonishingly high SATs, told me that he thought the best that I could do if I decided to go to college was to go to the University of Missouri. But if you think about it, I had informal role models. Mm-hmm. The most important was my older brother, Rob, who was the dearest person in the world to me, who taught me Latin when he started learning Latin when he went to high school, who always said, you're the smartest person in the family and you can do whatever you want to do. And it was difficult really to find role models for a young person like myself. But there were a few teachers who took an interest as well.
Now, when you did go to college, you went to Berkeley?
Well, I had a very roundabout path through college. My grandfather agreed to pay for the first year's tuition only on condition that I would live with my aunt in Arlington, Virginia, and go to one of the schools in Washington, D.C., because he felt that as a young woman, I needed to be under constant supervision. The only school that was acceptable to me was George Washington University. Catholic University at that point was not a very well-regarded school. Georgetown didn't take women at that point unless they wanted to major in modern languages. I was interested in ancient Greek, and George Washington thus ended up being the school. I did live with my aunt for a year, and she was a very beloved Auntie Mame type character. I don't think my grandfather understood that I was going to be moving in with a lady who the first night that I lived there said, "Darling, do you drink scotch or bourbon?" I was 18 years old. I did not actually know how to answer that question. And after that year, my grandfather, for other reasons having to do with our getting oppositional about the role of the Catholic Church in my life at that point, ceased to support me. And so I was completely self-supporting at the age of 19. And it took me many years, I believe it was 11 years, before I got my bachelor's degree. I dropped out, I took jobs as a secretary. A friend told me the schools in California were free. I therefore moved to California on that promise. Berkeley did give me a scholarship and living expenses, but I arrived in Berkeley in 1968 when the campus was full of tear gas and demonstrations and People's Park occurred. I dropped out in the spring semester, vowed I would never go back. Berkeley handled it beautifully. They wrote all of us who dropped out then every year saying, "Come back, all will be forgiven." And finally in 1972, at the point I decided I wanted to go to law school, therefore get a degree, I did finish up at Berkeley and graduated in 1973. I like to tell my students who are having some concerns about how difficult it can be to finish college in 4 years that there are role models there for them who took 11 years to finish college.
But what led you to Berkeley primarily was the concept of a free education.
Yes, which I got. A free first-rate education, the best Greek department in the entire country. I'll never regret it. It was a wonderful decision.
And that was your major, Greek?
Yes.
And you said in your last year you decided that you wanted to go to law school.
Yes. In fact, I decided the year before that I wanted to go to law school. In my many jobs that I've had, I worked as a secretary for legal services in San Francisco, and then as a secretary at a labor law firm in Oakland, California. And it was when I was in San Francisco at Neighborhood Legal Services that I met the first woman lawyer I had ever met in my life. And that is the first time I thought, well, perhaps this is something I could do. Moreover, as I corrected the briefs of the male attorneys who worked in the office for the many grammatical shortcomings, and we even got into a routine where I would say, well, to Dale McKenzie, a wonderful fellow I still know today, "Well, Dale, I give that brief a B, but really I know you're capable of doing better work. The attorneys in the office said you ought to consider law school." But again, self-supporting, having come up the way I did without any really family network, it was very hard for me to imagine, especially my peripatetic peregrination through undergraduate, that I could actually go to law school, afford it, get through in 3 years, etc. So I began at least thinking about it, and then took the LSAT on a lark, and did well, and decided that perhaps I would go to law school. So needed to get the BA in order to do that, went back to college.
The script indicates I'm supposed to ask you whether during college you participated in any extracurricular activities.
Yes, I minored in taking over the administration building. And my extracurricular activities all involved working.
Yes,
I always had to work.
Would have inferred from what you were saying. And did you, after getting your bachelor's degree, did you go directly to law school?
I did, because at that point I did know what I wanted to do, and that was kind of a cute story too, because I applied only to Bolt Hall. It never occurred to me to apply anywhere else. I didn't know, for instance, that there were other schools that gave scholarships, that there were, other possibilities. So I applied to Bolt Hall, and a dear friend of mine said, right away they wrote me a letter saying, "You're one of the people we're really interested in. Let us know if you get another offer." One of my friends said, "Where else are you applying?" I said, "Oh, well, nowhere else." And he said, "Well, there's this concept of the safety school, and why do you think you'll get in Bolt?" And I said, "Well, my grades are very good. My LSAT was very good. Of course I'll get in." He said, "Could you do me a favor and just apply to Hastings as a backstop? Because it's possible that Bolt won't take you. They don't like to take too many people who went to Berkeley undergraduate. And there is the matter that it took you 11 years to finish college, so you could potentially look a little bit like a flake to the people reading your file." So I applied to Hastings. They accepted me and gave me money like the day after I applied. I have never regretted it, because Bolt Hall did indeed put me on the wait list and let me go at some point. And I do believe when I became an academic and served on an appointments committee, I wouldn't have admitted me either, because if one did not know the full story, I looked like somebody who just had no idea what she wanted to do.
And at this point, what did your family members think about your going to law school?
Well, my mother, who was mentally ill, didn't really understand the whole thing. I remember calling her the night before my first exam, or I think she must have called me, and she kept saying, are you going to be a legal secretary? Is that what you're doing? I'd say, "No, Mother, I'm going to be a lawyer." And she said, "But women can't be lawyers." And I thought, I don't need this the night before my first exam. So I called my big brother, who said all sorts of wonderfully encouraging things. My older brother was thrilled and supported me all the way through, but that was really the only emotional support I had for the project.
And while you were in law school, did you maintain contact with the lawyers that you had previously worked for during your college years?
Absolutely. And they are still very, very dear friends to this day. When I got sworn in, I got sworn in by one of the judges that I knew, and the attorneys from legal services were all there on the day I got sworn in, and they are, as I said, to this very day, very dear friends of mine.
Then did any of them give you any particular advice about going to law school?
Well, that's also a very good story. The day that I started law school, I went into a very famous cafe on Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley called Cafe Med. And that's where all the truly cool people hung out, and the political people and the old lefties and all sorts of folks. And I ran into a bunch of legal services friends of mine. And I said, I had all my books. I said, "I am going to law school today." And they all said, "Oh, don't go to law school. It's no fun being a lawyer. Nobody's having fun anymore as a lawyer. It's really changed. And, we fixed all the civil rights problems. There really isn't anything to do." And I got furious at them. I said, "You're guys. You're thinking of it in a different way from the way I'm thinking of it. I'm a woman. I want to go to law school. There are very few of us, and I know there'll be plenty of things for me to do." Now, once I went, they were all incredibly supportive, but I just thought it was very funny that because they were at points in their careers where they were not all that satisfied with their jobs, they're telling me, oh, no, no, don't do it. And I said to them, what, should I stay a legal secretary for the rest of my life? Is that what you think I ought to do? And they, oh yeah, okay.
And how many women were there, I guess, in terms of percentage in your law school class?
My year was, I think this happened nationwide. I started in '73, and there were, I think, about 30% women in that class. I think by the time I graduated, it was very close to 50%. We were the first kind of big class. I think the year before was more like 25%, and then it just kind of went up every year. And when I looked at the statistics at UConn, it was very similar in right around that same time.
Yes, I can attest to
I
that.
bet, yeah.
In 72, it was
Yeah.
20%
Yeah.
at UConn Law School. Did you enjoy law school?
I hated the first year. I hated almost every minute of the first year. I would leave and go for long walks. It was hard for me. Hastings was still that year. It had the over 65 club, very distinguished, all gentlemen who had been famous professors, Prosser, who had been at Bolt, Richard Powell on property. They wrote all the treatises. They were retired. This was in the era of mandatory retirement. And so Hastings offered them a home. It was a great thing that Hastings did. It brought a lot of luster to the school. But these guys were still very much enmeshed in the scare them to death method of teaching. And that didn't work very well for me. I felt that I was much, much older. In fact, I felt that I was ancient. I was 29 when I started law school. Hard for me now to believe that I felt so ancient. And to be treated with such disrespect. We even had a professor who would say, here's a dime, go call your mother and tell her you don't belong in law school. We had a professor who would say, what was your LSAT? That answer was really stupid. You must have gone to a bad school, and just humiliating stuff like that. So my way of dealing with it was not terribly mature. I would just walk out and cut classes. This was back in the day also when there was more cutting of classes than there is now. They didn't have seating charts. They didn't know your names. There were 100 of us in every class, and the professor would just read through the list. And the class might be full, yet no one would answer. And the professor would not know who Nell Newton was if he called on Nell Newton. The end of first year, I wrote onto the law review, which was a great saving grace for me because I love the law review. And also I could, second year, choose the classes and the professors that I wanted. Second year is when I had the intellectual awakening. I had constitutional law, I had labor law, administrative law, wonderful teachers who were in the more modern method of teaching, which is what I like to call loving them into perfection rather than scaring them. And I really blossomed then. But that particular method of teaching didn't work for me. And I remember going to Jerome Hall, who was famous for his method of teaching that way, and saying to him after first year, why do you do that? And I'll never forget his answer, because he was a decent fellow who really cared, brilliant. He said, my belief is that you want to make the man hate you. If you make him hate you, he's going to try to show you that he's better than you are. And I said, Professor Hall, I'm not sure that even works for men, but have you ever thought that it really might not work for women? And he actually said, well, no one's ever said that to me before. And I don't know if it changed his teaching method, but I felt better about having gone to talk to him about it.
And what was the reaction of your male classmates to having women in the class?
The men in the class were pretty good about it. I'll tell you where they weren't good. We had only one female professor, and that's probably true at UConn at that time as well. I think Shirley Beisowitz was there when you were there.
Yes.
We had one female professor, and she was brand new. She had practiced criminal law all of her life, and they assigned her to contracts. She actually was a good contracts teacher. I learned a lot of contracts from her, but she couldn't handle the class. And the men, or shall I say boys in the class, would not stop talking. We had bells at Hastings, if you can believe that. So the bell would ring, and she would say, please could we get going, let's get going, but kind of in a soft voice. She couldn't handle the class. They were brutal to her, and the women in the class were furious about it. She left teaching after a year, which is a shame, because if she had gone in teaching a few years later even, she had I think great potential and was incredibly smart. When the law review was sort of taken over by women, the year I got onto law review, Sue Popick was the second female editor in a row. And there was some rumbling about that. So my dear friend Alice Haller ran for editor-in-chief, and one of the guys ran for editor-in-chief. And I felt that that election was a little bit more gendered than it ought to have been. Proud to say that Alice won the election. And I think after that, people stopped counting how many women or how many men there were in a row because men and women equally were active in the law review since then.
Is there a single event that you remember most as characterizing your law school experience?
There were lots of moments. I think one of them was meeting Joe Groden, who later went on to the California Supreme Court, on the first day of law school, because Joe said to me, we were on the same trolley car together, he said, "Hi, I'm Joe Groden," not Professor Groden, not, you know. And during that first year, when I kept wanting to just quit because I hated it, I kept thinking about people like Joe Groden, and that he was on the faculty, and he was a wonderful person. I would go visit him occasionally, and he was really great. And then we became very close friends. I just had dinner with him a few weeks ago in San Francisco. But my constitutional law teacher, third year, came to see me and said, "You would be a really good teacher. Have you ever thought about teaching law?" Well, please, me teach law? I had never thought about anything like that. I was going to be a Vista lawyer in my old legal services office. And I said to John, "Why? Why do you think that?" And John Van Dyke, who's now a professor at Hawaii, and he said, because you have the ability to articulate very complex concepts very clearly. You have a very, commanding personality. You're incredibly smart. And I'm looking around like, who is he talking about? He then suggested that I apply to be a legal writing teacher at Catholic University. He had taught at Catholic for a few years before coming to Hastings. And he said, it's a really wonderful small school, small law school, very family, wonderful community. You really ought to consider it. And I said, well, I don't have a resume. So he sort of sat down with me while I typed up and helped me create a resume, and I got that job. So I always credit John, because as soon as I started teaching, I fell in love with teaching. And I would never have considered it had John not come to me that day.
I'm going to ask you some more questions later about your employment history, but I just want to stay with law school for a few more questions. What was the most important thing that you learned in law school?
Writing, critical thinking, and clear critical writing. And it was the law review experience that was so important to me. The writing, then the editing of other people's writing. I learned so much through that process.
Now, in your last year, you were editor of the law
I was the
review.
managing editor.
Managing editor.
This is the job they give to the person who won the Blue Booking Award her second year, which I did indeed win. Sorry to say, I think it was parsing all those irregular Greek verbs that did it.
Did you work part-time in a legal capacity at any time while you were in law school, or perhaps during the summers?
Hastings gave me a tremendous gift, which was sufficient money that during the school year I did not have to work. This is the only time in my life that I did not have to work, and it was wonderful. Of course, I worked in the summers. In the summer of my first year, in the spring of my first year, I called the lawyers that I knew, who were mostly legal services lawyers, and said, I can get work-study money, will you take me? And they all said yes. And I chose to go to California Indian Legal Services in Oakland to work for a fellow named Bruce Green, who I knew. And that's how I got involved in Indian law. And in my second summer, I worked at Public Advocates, which was a public interest law firm in San Francisco.
Now, did you just take the usual courses in law school, or is there a focus for the courses you chose?
I took, and I still say this to students, I took the professors, not the courses. And with one exception, third year I was desperate, I didn't take the easy professors. I took the professors that I heard were the best professors and the toughest, but the tough but fair ones, not the mean-spirited ones, who mainly were in the first year. So for instance, I took antitrust from Jim McCall. What did I know about antitrust? Nothing. But several friends of mine said Jim McCall is a phenomenal teacher. He later argued before the Supreme Court a bunch of times. And antitrust is a really tough course. And that separates the women from the girls, if you can do well in antitrust. So then I had to do it. And it was a great course. So there was no plan other than take courses from people that I thought would teach me a lot and teach me well.
Now, when and where did you take the bar exam?
I took the bar exam in California. And the California bar is, as you know, extremely tough, but I studied very hard for it and went running every day. I had this whole very compulsive schedule. At noon I would take a little break. I studied for it in Berkeley because I was living in Berkeley then, so I studied at Bolt. And I remember the night before the bar calling several of my friends and listing the names of all the prominent and very smart people we knew who had flunked the bar. Perhaps this will happen to us, but it's happened to others, and we will overcome this. But we all passed the bar on the first try, and we were thrilled.
Did you have to take a bar exam at subsequent time for other states, or were you?
No, D.C. I waived in. And by the time I came to Connecticut I joined the Connecticut Bar Association. But I said, I'm not going to take another bar examination.
And so I assume you were sworn into the California bar then?
I was, yes, exactly.
And how many women attorneys were sworn in with you?
That I don't know. I was sworn in privately because I had already moved out to D.C., and so on a trip back, we had a little private swearing in, which was very nice.
And so I take it your legal writing job at Catholic University in Washington, D.C. was your first job?
It was indeed my first job.
And do you recall what jobs were available generally to graduating women graduating from law school?
I think that by the time that I graduated, as I think back to, for instance, the women in my class who had ambitions to work for the big firms, they got those jobs. I think at that point, most jobs were open to women.
And you graduated in 76?
I graduated in 76. So were they getting hired in the same percentage, et cetera? I don't know. But it was the beginning of the sort of the second wave, and women were getting all sorts of important jobs. Were they getting as many of the most prestigious clerkships at that point? I'm not sure, though certainly we had colleagues who clerked in the California Supreme Court and for the Federal District Court in California at that time.
And were most of these jobs in California that the women were getting?
Hastings had a fair number of people who went to Washington, D.C. There was a group that went there around the same time I did to work in agencies, one of them to work in a big firm in D.C. So there did seem to be opportunities. I think now even more work in D.C. and New York and Boston than at that time.
And did you look for employment other than this opportunity at Catholic U?
Well, I did, because it was only a 9-month contract. And in fact, the plan, I like to say that men often make 5-year plans, but women choose the serendipity path. This was the only time in my life I actually sort of had a plan, or thought I did. And that was that I would teach for a year to see if I liked teaching, and then go back to California, or perhaps work in D.C. for a few years and go back to California. And that if I liked teaching, then I understood that what I should do is work for 3 or 4 years and then go back into a tenure track teaching position.
I see.
Most of the time, people did not want to hire folks on the tenure track who had no practice experience. and you can't say that my summers really counted very much as practice experience. I did have an offer at the Federal Reserve Board in the General Counsel's office. Not the Federal Reserve Board, I'm sorry, the Federal Trade Commission in the General Counsel's office, which was a very good offer and a very good position. But Catholic U came to me and said, would you like to join the tenure track? We've been very happy with you. We would love for you to stay. And I thought, well, I really ought to go get some practice experience, but how do I know this opportunity will come again? So I decided to stay.
And was that the end of your first year of teaching?
It was at the end of my first year of teaching. And then in my second year, I taught contracts, conflict of laws, and the first course they'd ever had in American Indian law.
And how many women professors, instructors were there on the faculty at Catholic U at that time?
You know, there were very few, and in fact, as I look back, I think one of the reasons they came to me was that two of the women who had been on the tenure track but not yet tenured had left that year. And I believe there was only one other woman. There was another woman hired with me, and that was it, except for the legal writing instructors.
And this was a faculty of what size approximately?
At that point, probably only about 25.
Okay. And so that first year you taught just legal writing?
Yes.
And then in the second year, obviously, you moved on to
Yes.
bigger and better
Yes.
things.
Well, and typical for schools at that time, they asked me to teach a full load and then to direct the legal writing program, which meant I had to hire the new legal writing instructors with no summer grant or summer stipend or enhanced stipend for doing all of this, because I think it was still in the time when one thought that especially women should just be grateful for being given these jobs and be willing to do everything.
Do you remember what you were paid for that first year?
Yes, $19,000.
And was that similar to what your male law school classmates were earning?
Certainly not at all I can speak to is Catholic U.
Right.
Twice I had to go to the higher ups at the school to have my salary looked at from an equity standpoint, and twice my salary was doubled to put me in line with my male colleagues.
So women were viewed as a bargain rate
Indeed.
commodity.
Indeed. And unfortunately, at one point, there was a nun, a lovely woman, Sister Rosemary Donnelly, who was the provost. And I'll never forget Linda Mullinex, who is now at Texas, and I went to Sister Rosemary and said, this is not right. We are underpaid. We are publishing more than anyone else. We get great teaching evaluations. And Sister Rosemary said to Linda, you have a husband, you have no right to complain. You maybe we can do something about, because you're a spinster. It was a different time.
And how long did you stay at Catholic U?
Despite what I've just said, I loved Catholic U. It was a wonderful community. The students were fantastic. And I stayed there for, I believe it was 14 years.
What was the most interesting thing that you did while you were there?
Well, I was the first woman tenured. I was the first woman to become a full professor. I really, to say the most interesting thing I did was fall in love with teaching and fall in love with my students and really develop my scholarship in Indian law. So those were very productive years for me as well. But I do have to say that when I went up for full professor in schools in the European tradition, like Catholic U, at such schools, full professor is much harder to get than tenure. Tenure is security, full professor is power and authority. During that period, full professors had double votes on all important matters having to do with hiring, retention, and promotion. And I was the first woman to come up for full professor, and some of my colleagues made my life very difficult. I did get full professor, and in fact, when the dean came back from the meeting with the university committee, I think even he, who I think believed in me, looked a little bit shocked. He came back and said, the university committee said, how could we have a scholar of your stature here and not be celebrating you more. It was a unanimous vote, whereas internally there were people who, a tenured full professor who started with me called me into his office and said, and you know me, Christine, he said, "You have the best file I've ever seen for full professor. I am, however, going to vote against you because you are harsh and uncaring." So after I got full professor, I decided I would leave Catholic University, and that's why I went to American University.
Now, did you, let me back up just a second. What was your daily routine when you were teaching at Catholic U in terms of working hours and lunch and that sort of thing?
Well, I love to work. It's a blessing and a curse, but I think in the end I've decided it's a blessing. I'm one of those teachers who needs maximum amount of preparation to be good in the classroom. It's just the way I am. So I would, depending on if my first class was at 10, then I would have to get up at 5 in order to be ready for class. So I would prepare for class, then go for a run. I was a marathoner in those days. I would go for a run. We often would teach 2 sections of the same class, which is a really punishing thing to do. You teach in the morning or in midday, and then again in the evening division. And so if that were the case, then I would come back and re-prepare, look at what I did in the morning, how well did it work, what worked, what didn't work, and then re-prepare for the evening division. So my life was pretty much preparing for teaching, serving on committees, and then in the time that I had, primarily summers. I never was very good at writing during the school year because I was so involved in my teaching and always carried very heavy loads. Contracts at that point was 5 credits, 3 days a week, for instance. And after teaching for about 4 years, they finally gave me constitutional law, which was also 5 credits, 3 days a week. So my teaching load was always very heavy. And that's kind of mainly what I did.
Did you have any mentors in your first year or two?
I did. I remember when I was assigned to teach contracts, 2 of the fellows who taught contracts, one who was just leaving, Ike Hunt, and another one who was still there, Lou Barricato. Ike gave me his notes as he left. He said, "Good luck, I know you're going to be great. Here are my contracts notes. Use the book I used and use these notes." And Lou Barricato was teaching contracts that year, and we would talk every day about contracts. And it was wonderful because it wasn't, Lou never had the attitude that he knew everything. He hadn't taught contracts very long, and so we would really have very nice, well, how are you going to do this? Or what do you think about that? And that was a terrific thing. And there were a couple of very good teachers on the faculty then who I would go to for advice on teaching as well.
Now, were there advantages or disadvantages to being a woman teaching at that time?
I did not have the problems that my woman teacher had, but I actually used her as a reverse mentor, which is why I would never name her name, because she's a wonderful person. I made a list. What did she do that contributed to the disorder in the classroom? What could she have done better, having sat in the class and watched this? And I made a whole list, and then down on the other side, I wrote, okay, what should I do? And there were some little things. She still dressed like a hippie. So I said, I'm going to dress more professionally. She carried her purse to class on top of her books, and I thought that perhaps made her look too feminized. I've never taken a purse to class. I carry my keys. Little things. Perhaps the biggest one was I have never waited for a room to quiet down. I just start talking, and if they're not quiet, they're not going to hear what I'm saying, and it works like magic. So things like that. I also always took pride in memorizing the names of all of my students, so that on the second day, any class I've ever taught, anywhere I've ever taught, I will go in there, and the first day I give them a seating chart, I memorize the seating chart, And on the second day, I pick a young man in the back of the room, maybe the third from the very back, and I say, "What do you think, Roger?" And there's this wonderful sort of intake of breath. It's a control, it's a mechanism that I do to show that I'm in control. But they also just love it. And they pretty quickly figure out that I've done it by memorizing the seating chart. It takes me a while to then recognize their faces outside of class. And that I learned from all my teachers at Hastings, who never knew the names of any of the students in their classes. And that worked very effectively.
Now, you told me some of this, but let me ask again, what was the attitude of the men on the faculty toward you?
I think that for the most part, I had very good relations with my male colleagues. But I do think that that was a time at which men with authority were more comfortable giving security to women than they were in giving authority or power to women.
Giving security to women?
Yes. My tenure vote was a love fest.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Because tenure means you get to stay there forever. It's security. And I had a fantastic file, as any woman who's the first woman coming up for tenure would have. You know it's got to be a really great file. And everything was smooth. It was wonderful. But giving someone like me real power was the stopping point. I was never asked to chair a major committee. I was on the President's Commission for the Status of Women of the university, and I chaired that commission, and we did a lot of good things. We wrote a family leave policy for the university, but within the law school, I was never asked to chair a committee as well. And I think there was still then, hopefully there isn't now, concern about strong women not exercising power well.
And so after you said 14 years at Catholic, you went to American University.
Yes, I did.
And tell me why that was a better opportunity for you.
Well, American University had been founded by women. And American University had more of a history, I think, of being open to women. There were more women on the faculty at American University, tenured women, women who chaired committees. I very soon was asked to chair a committee after joining the faculty there. So I felt it was more open in that way. And I was very happy to be there. My scholarship, I think, was more appreciated as well. And I essentially had a really great time being on the faculty at American U and felt that I was, in the sort of inner circle, as were other women.
And what percentage of the faculty at American was women?
Well, it still is about a third, which I think is good, but I'd like to see that inch up toward 50%, since there have been so many women graduating from the law schools in the last 20 years.
And how long were you at American?
I was at American, I can't remember if it was 8 or 9 years.
Okay.
Because I then became a dean.
So you left American for the deanship at Denver? At
University of Denver, right. I did not leave American for any other reason. But after being there for a few years, people began nominating me for deanships. And it was a similar experience I had with John Van Dyke on the issue of going into teaching. When someone would call and say, "You've been nominated," I would say, "Why? What did they say about me? Why have I been not? Is it just you need a woman in the pool? I mean, what, And after a few years of this, I decided that, well, perhaps this is something that I should explore.
And so you went to Denver to be the dean?
I did indeed.
And you were dean there for how long?
I was there for only 2 years. Denver was not a good fit for many reasons. Denver was a faculty that had not 2 but 3 factions, had been at war for a long time, and I ignored, perhaps like a young person in love, I ignored all the very clear warning signs that they seemed to have hated all of their deans. So why was I somehow going to make everything better? It was a very factionalized place. And I think more seriously, there were about 12 faculty members, men, primarily older, who did not want to work with me and not only refused to work with me, but actively tried to undercut me the whole time I was there. The junior faculty then were put in the position of defending me when what they should have been doing is working on their teaching and their scholarship. And I did a lot of things that I'm very proud of. I counseled out 3 tenured professors and cleaned up some staff issues that were really out of hand. But when you're a turnaround artist, that what you find is half the people hate you and the other half love you, and it's not good for the institution. It certainly wasn't good for me. Then Connecticut came. I was trying to figure out what to do about this. I had pretty much decided, I think I'm just going to resign at the end of my second year because I'm good. I know I'm good. I will either get a tenured offer. Well, of course, I could stay at Denver as a tenured law professor, but I will either get a tenured lateral offer or I will become dean somewhere else, a place that's really ready for a woman dean, because Denver also was not ready for a woman dean. Much of what happened to me there I felt was gendered, and that's not a conclusion I leap to all the time. Then Connecticut started calling. Ann Daly and Paul Berman were on the search committee, and they called, and I said, no, I feel, they called early on. I said, I feel loyalty. I'm not a serial dean. I'm committed to this place. I'm not interested. But they just kept calling, and I'll never forget. One day, Paul Berman called me, and he said, Dean, I don't know if anyone told you this, but we really are a very well-behaved faculty, which they are. And I thought, maybe I'd better take a look at this.
Well-behaved.
And they are. They truly are.
Did you have any prior experience with Connecticut as a state before coming here?
I had come to UConn several times to give talks. And I knew a few people. I knew Hugh McGill because, of course, we were fellow deans, and I would talk to him from time to time. What candidates are you going after? What are you going after? And then in the 2 times that I had come to give lectures at UConn, I got to know some of the faculty there and was very impressed, of course, the gorgeous campus. So I knew something about UConn, and I certainly had decided that I was a bi-coastal person, that I was more comfortable on the coast than I was in the center of the nation. And so I foolishly said, I'm very familiar with New England because I lived in Washington, D.C. And people said, no. Washington, D.C. is the South. It certainly isn't New England, So that was the little bit that I knew about Connecticut before I came here.
And you came as dean in
2000.
And how many women were on the faculty when you came?
I think we were about a third women at that point. And again, I would love to add to that. And we have added to that. And I'll tell you an interesting story about the treatment of women at UConn. When I came to interview, I had already met Chief Justice Peters, who has an office at the law school and teaches a course every year, and was very, well, of course, what's not to be impressed with Justice Peters, but also the high regard that she was held in by the law faculty and the entire community. And then when I came to interview, I met Carol Weisbrot. Carol Weisbrot is a senior, probably the most senior tenured woman on the faculty. And I noticed how much just natural authority she had and how much people deferred to her. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. If you look at a community and look at how well the elder women, the elders who are women, are treated, and if they're treated with respect, this means this is a community that has been comfortable with women exercising authority for some time. And that made a very big impression on me when I came and interviewed and was offered the job and immediately decided to come.
And was the student body at that point roughly 50-50 men and women?
Yes, it had been for some time. Yeah.
And what, in your, I guess, six years as dean, what do you think of as your proudest accomplishments?
There's so many things I'm proud of. And again, my mantra is, it's not about me, it's about them. It's easy to lead a group that is willing to be led, that has the commitment to scholarship, teaching, and collegiality that this group does. This group operates closer to true consensus than any group that I've ever known. And that means if someone who is respected, and by respected I mean somebody who's an institutional player, who when she or he serves on committees is active, who gives back to the law school, if someone says, I have a problem with this, then everyone pays attention to it. And we go around and we talk to each other in the halls, and we wait until that person says, okay, I'm willing to go along with it. Almost all of our votes are unanimous. I've even said to the junior faculty, it's okay to vote no. Please don't feel that you cannot vote no. It's fine to vote no if you feel strongly about something. You know, we're not the Borgs, which is the, some science fiction group that mind think is all the same. But our custom is, if you feel strongly, go around and talk to everybody and communicate your concerns. I love that about that institution. I didn't create that. They created that. I think what I'm the proudest about is that I'm a bottom-up kind of person, so that I have enabled faculty to do all sorts of things they might not otherwise have done. So we started an asylum and human rights clinic because John Bauer came to me and we had a long talk, and I said, I think, our international law offerings are really good. We're really good in human rights. And he said, well, I've always wanted to run an asylum clinic. I said, well, let's do it. Let's make it happen. And so many things that we've done, our tax clinic and other things that we've started, our certificate programs, it's because faculty came to me and said, I want to do something. And I've been very, very proud of that. I've been very proud of our hires. We've hired terrific, terrific people for our law faculty. Many of them have been women. Next year, we're bringing in 2 women, Bethany Berger and Ruth Mason, and a lateral guy, Michael Fischel, who's a wonderful labor law scholar. And then our first South Asian faculty member, Sachin Pandya, who has been a fellow at Columbia and will be a visiting assistant professor, so he'll be with us for 2 years as he gets ready for the teaching market. That's another thing we started. Occasionally hiring bright young things who want to go in the market but need some mentoring and some time to write, and they teach a light load and stay with us for a few years, and we're very excited about that as well.
And just to bring things current, you'll be leaving UConn to go home in a way.
I will be going back to Hastings, my alma mater, to be the dean there. And it'll be the first time I'm not the first woman. I'm the second woman, and I rather like that.
Okay. Now I want to turn from your professional life to a little bit on the personal side. Did you at any point marry?
Did you at any point marry? It sounds like,
well, you've had it sounds like a very busy life.
Yes, I did. I married in 1981 a colleague of mine at Catholic University, Roger Hartley. And we parted in, I think, 1989 or 1988. And I have to say, he's a fine fellow. I'm not going to say anything against him. Perhaps, again, for us, it wasn't a good fit. My love of scholarship and the way that I throw myself into my work made the marriage difficult for Roger, who really wanted someone who was more centered on the home, and that was not going to be me. We remained. It was a cordial. It was complicated getting divorced from somebody who was on your own faculty, but I think everyone will say that we both handled it very well, and I have nothing but admiration for him as a person and a scholar.
Did you have children?
We did not have children.
Now you are close to some young people, nephews?
Yes, I have he's sort of an adopted nephew. My best friend died when he was 18. And he and I have always been close, and we became even closer after that. And so we decided that I would call him my nephew, though I often call him my youth. He lived with me for 8 months in Hartford, and he went to NYU, and we are incredibly close, and he's moving back to the Bay Area. So
Oh,
I'm
is
very
he? Oh, how
excited
nice.
about
You
that.
must be looking forward to that.
Yes,
And
very
what
much
does
so.
he do?
Sammy's a filmmaker. He went to NYU, majored in film. He's just getting back from Botswana, where he's making a film on women with AIDS. He's a great feminist, as was his mother. And he has a wonderful young lady that he's been with for many years. And I, though never having had children, seem to have inherited or just biologically have the grandmother gene. So I am like lusting after grandchildren. Sammy and Ashwarya did tell me 2 years ago that if I would move back west, they wanted to relocate. He grew up in Petaluma, that they would relocate to be near me. They wanted to start their family when they did start their family near me.
How nice.
And that was another reason that I accepted the Hastings offer.
We're going to take a break at this point.
Fantastic.
All right.
Thank you, Christine. Up to.
First female at Merthyr Carolina. As an educator now, I assume probably you were in a position to mentor female law students throughout your career.
Absolutely, and it's one of the great pleasures of being a student. And to even keep in touch 30 years later with students that I had many years ago, it's been a wonderful thing. And as a mentor of students going into the practice of law, I have learned a lot about the practice of law and how it's changed over time, or not changed, with respect to young women. Certainly at the beginning, though in my experience in DC, when I first started teaching contracts in '77, the young women were getting hired by the best firms, let's say. They were probably not getting hired in as many numbers as were the young men. And I distinctly remember a young woman at a firm that is, I think, still has the same culture today, to be frank, a DC firm, telling me that she didn't like sports or drinking. And this firm was just known for hard partying after work at sports bars or wherever, and everything was always arranged around sports events. And she just wasn't interested, and she left the firm because she felt very strongly there was not going to be any room for advancement for her in that firm. But on the other hand, there were some firms, and I identified a few, that I could see were more open to women and less concerned about the sports being the center of the universe. And I then recommended women to those firms and had a very good, and I'll name one of them because I think they did such a good job, Cleary Gottlieb, Steen and Hamilton's Washington, D.C. office. At one point, the hiring partner said, if Nell Newton sends us someone, that's someone we're going to look at. And I sent them women. I also sent them men. I, of course, believe that I want to mentor everyone, my male students as well as my female students. And I really was struck by the difference in culture at many firms. And the same was true of government offices. Some agencies were more open and friendly to women than other agencies as well. And it was good. A teacher who really wants to mentor students needs to gather as much of that information as possible. I also early on had to deal with issues of sexual harassment. Both, even, I'm sorry to say, clerks clerking for judges, a particularly horrendous situation that happened to a young woman that I knew. who I think it affected her for the rest of her life because she felt she could not do anything, that she had no recourse, and also did not stop clerking for that judge because she felt that that clerkship was her ticket and questions would be asked.
Yes.
And we certainly hope that that is not happening to the extent that it used to happen. A student of mine who worked on the Hill before the days that, as you may recall, Congress exempted itself from Title VII, who was grabbed by her senator almost every day of her life. She had 2 young children. Her husband had just left her. She felt she had no other options, and so she would try to treat it as a joke and do all of the many things that women used to have to do in dealing with that situation. And one thing that struck me about that situation was she told me years later, she told me about it while it was happening, but she told me years later that if she saw him at an official event, she would walk over and shake his hand. Because I said, how could you shake his hand? She said, I'm a lobbyist now. I have to be, you know, I have to be professional with these people no matter what they have done in the past. When Anita Hill accused Clarence Thomas, I represented someone who testified in her favor. And because of that, and because I was known to many women staffers working on the Hill, I received many, many phone calls from women saying, these things are happening all over still. And that was not that long ago.
Right.
So we have not completely solved the problem of sexual harassment, though I do think some of the really most blatant stuff is not there. And the law firms, I think, have been very good about inclusion in more recent years, inclusion of women, of people of color, and of sort of getting the point that sexual harassment is not something you want to have to pay for down the road. So I think it's not all over, it's not all been fixed. I don't want to, but I think things are much better. But I cannot tell you how many times I've had to counsel young women who went into the workforce with their shiny JDs, having excelled all the way through law school, and run into a really horrendous situation. The other issue that, of course, has not gone away is work-family. My friend Joan Williams, who was a law professor at American with me, and is now, I'm very proud to say, a distinguished professor at Hastings Law School, wrote a book called Unbending Gender. And Joan has started a center on work life at Hastings and has written on this and talked about these issues. She goes to Rotary clubs. She's an interesting example of a very intellectual woman, scholar, who knows how to use all the au courant postmodern language in her law review articles, who consciously learn, how can I communicate to people who are not law trained, who are not academics, about matters that are really important to me. And Joan believes, as do many other women, that we need to restructure the workplace to accommodate women who have families in much better ways. We spend all this money training women associates, the law firms, and then they leave or they go part-time and they go off the track to partner, and very often do indeed leave. And that's a silly waste of their expense. Joan came up with this great construct called the ideal worker. The ideal worker is a person who has no family obligations. And that's going to be an unmarried woman or a man. And Joan, in her most feminist days, would say a man who has a free-flowing domestic services provided by his spouse. I always loved that term. But I began then looking at women in positions, very important positions, and noticing how many of them, like me, had no children, even if they were married. It's difficult. It's difficult. There are the ones who do it, who manage it, and isn't it amazing? But it's very difficult to have the traditional career and manage a family. And so many times in talking to my third-year students with their eyes big and smiles, saying, well, my husband and I are going to share everything equally, and I'm going to go to work for a big firm, and so is he, and we're both going to make partner, and it's really going to be wonderful, only to find 5 years later, 6 years later, that the husband is going to make partner and the wife has gone on the mommy track. We really need to think of ways to restructure things so that you can take time off and yet come back and come back on the same kind of level that you were at when you went off, without the feeling that now you have to be off the track and permanently. And also the part-time option, which for women is often it's supposed to be part-time, but part-time, let's face it, for women attorneys is 40 hours a week rather than 80 hours a week. We really need to rethink that, and I think that remains a very important issue for us.
Changing topics, I want to talk a little bit about bar associations and your involvement with bar associations. Are you a member of any bar associations?
I am a member of the California Bar, the DC Bar, and the Connecticut Bar Association. I'm not a member of the bar, but I'm a member of the Bar Association. In DC, I was not very active, and of course I haven't lived in California in my professional life. In Denver, the Bar Association and the City Bar Association, I was very active. They had just a great group of attorneys. They did a lot of interesting things. The Inns of Court were very active also in Denver, and I was active in that movement as well. And I liked the way the Colorado Bar, being a relatively small bar, there are only 2 schools in Colorado, at every bar meeting, they would have a report from each of the deans. I thought that was a lovely habit to have. And so I was active there. And then in Connecticut, when I came, I was also a member of the Colorado Bar Foundation. And when I came to Connecticut, I was asked to be a Cooper Fellow, which I very much loved being. And I was also served on the advisory committee for the fellows. And have, from time to time done things with the Connecticut Bar and the county bars as well, the New Haven County Bar, the Hartford County Bar, and the, I think it's the Middlesex County
Middlesex
Bar.
County, right. And have you been involved in community activities, I think particularly in Connecticut?
My community activities have not been great because I work all the time. I have, despite my quarrels with the Catholic Church as a youngster, reconnected, and so I am connected with the Catholic Church and take a great deal of joy out of that relationship. And I'm also on the board of directors of the Connecticut Opera. Opera at a very crucial time in my life. I like to say opera saved my life, because at a time in my life when I lived with my mother and things were very, very bad and we were extremely poor and I just saw no hope for anything. I met a man who owned a record store, and I would go by the record store every day and he would play opera for me and introduce me to opera. And I think the reason that opera for a child at risk is it can be so important. There's not an obvious connection there. Opera we think of as being very upper class and why would a kid like me? But opera is about all the unnameable emotions, unbelievably inexpressible emotions of joy, of sorrow, and the things that people did in operas, like accidentally throwing the wrong baby in the fire, well, came kind of close to happening in my own family life. So that opera and the love of that music and the ability to get those emotions to the surface in that music was an incredibly important part of my early life. So I've joined the board of the Connecticut Opera, and I've derived a great pleasure from helping out our local opera.
We turn now sort of to a retrospective, if we can, of your career, and ask for some reflections and things. Are there historical events that affected your career in one way or another? Perhaps the civil rights movement, the opposition to the Vietnam War, the women's movement. Are there ways in which any of these events or other ones you think have affected your career?
Well, certainly I think anyone of my generation would start with the civil rights movement. It was so inspiring. And because I lived very often in great poverty, I was thrown in the company more of people of color, I think, than a lot of other people who come from privileged backgrounds. And these were people who were kind to me, and they weren't, you know, working for my family. They were just people that I met. I remember when I worked at the age of 15 at a department store, I got off at 9:30 at night and took a bus, a fairly long bus ride home, and then walked about, a mile from the bus stop to my house, getting home around 10:30 at night, then go to school the next day. A gentleman who worked at the department store in a very menial role, an African-American gentleman, realized this and began giving me a ride home. He would just happen to be there, let me give you a ride home. He had a daughter. I wouldn't want my daughter taking this bus at this hour. And it wasn't until years later I realized what danger he was putting himself in by doing this. But the kindness and that, having known people like that and then seeing the sea change beginning with the civil rights movement was enormously important to me. The Vietnam War was enormously important to me. I lost my first true love in the war and became very embittered and became active in the anti-war movement. So a lot of these times I wasn't in school, I was active in the anti-war movement. And I have to say that I spelled America with a K for a while there. I mean, I got pretty angry about this nation. And what brought me back was Watergate. Watergate, during the year I was taking constitutional law with one of the best professors I've ever had, made me see that we have a country that's worth fighting for. We have a country that can have an orderly transition of power. And I fell as deeply in love with the Constitution as I have fallen in love with almost anything else. And then I would add the women's movement. The women's movement is what got me into law school and nourished me a great deal during my entire career.
Was there any major legislation that affected your career or your legal specialty at any point in your career?
Well, first, as far as affecting my career, you might be kind of amazed at the answer. Title IX. We were not permitted to play sports when I was a girl. Now, I'm a small person. I never was going to be a great basketball player, let's face it. But especially at the Catholic schools, it was field hockey, and that was indeed it. And Title IX and women getting confident about their own bodies in the way that only sports can bring you. And it came around at the time that I began running. And running for me, which I did until I was close to 50, was incredibly good for my self-image and just my sense of self and my sense of strength. I mean, of course, Title VII was important and many other pieces of legislation, but the women's sports movement was actually very, very close to my heart. In Indian law, believe it or not, Richard Nixon was a great president for Native Americans, and some of the legislation passed then was extremely important for Indians and for Indian tribes. And so as a scholar, that legislation really affected much of the direction that my scholarship took.
That legislation protected the rights of Indians?
They protected the rights of Indians as tribes, as sovereign entities, as sort of quasi-sovereign entities, and also reinvigorated the trust relationship. I've done a lot of work on the trust relationship, and Nixon was the first president to come out and say, you know, if we manage all of their property and their money, whether or not they want us to, because we have decided that they're not competent to manage their own, we are trustees, and we have to act like trustees. And that is the reason, by the way, that the $1 billion trust trust fund case is still working its way through the courts, because despite what he said in the legislation that was enacted then and later, the U.S. has continued, I'm sorry to say, to mismanage tribal trust funds. The difference is that beginning in the Nixon and then the Reagan era, tribes are able to manage their own money if they so choose.
Why did you want to become a lawyer?
I wanted to become a lawyer for the most cynical of all reasons, and I wonder how many other people had the same reason. As I looked forward, I wanted to earn a living, and I wanted that living. I don't think I thought that lawyers were fabulously wealthy, but I wanted to earn a living, and I could see that even the very best legal secretary did not make very much money. I knew that at that time, the Greek departments were not only closing, but the ones that existed were very closed to women. Greek departments were sort of the last bastions of male supremacy. And I was told several times, one professor at Berkeley said to me, if you marry a Greek professor, you might be able to get a job as a trailing spouse, but otherwise, forget it. So I knew that getting a PhD in classical languages was not going to open any doors for me. And by God, I wanted a job. And I thought of law as a trade. It wasn't going to be very interesting. It wasn't going to engage me intellectually, but at least I could do real estate closings, I could do something, would be a trade. I didn't expect to fall in love with it as I did, though, admittedly, not till my second year of law school.
What do you think the rewards and advantages have been of your career?
It's always so hard to say that. I think that the rewards have been the incredible people that I've met. The student who lived for 4 years with pancreatic cancer and came out to Denver and went skiing a month before she died, a student of mine from American U. The students that I met, the faculty colleagues, the members of the community, people like you who I otherwise would not have met. An old law school friend who's now been appointed to the California Supreme Court. I'm so excited about that, Carol Corrigan. The many different kinds of people that because of my job, I've had the opportunity to meet them and learn about them. That has always been for me the greatest reward.
If you had the chance to live life over again, would you become an attorney?
Who knows? We had a wonderful commencement speaker, Allison Duncan, on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, and she gave the best commencement speech I've ever heard. Allison said, or Judge Duncan, I should say, said, if you do whatever life gives you, if you do it well and throw yourself into it, who knows what other doors will open. So I don't know if I had my life to live over again, would I become a lawyer? I hope that I would have as happy and fulfilled a life as I have had.
What advice would you give to a woman entering the legal profession today?
I think I would give that same advice. Whatever comes your way, do it and throw yourself into it. And I would add something. If it's not working for you, if you're at a place where you're not appreciated, leave. Go somewhere else. There are so many places where you will be appreciated, and you deserve better than to be in a place where, for whatever reason, the culture of the place, whatever the reason is, your qualities, your good qualities are not seen. Go somewhere else.
How do you view the role of lawyers in society today?
I still believe that lawyers are essential. As our society has become more and more regulated, lawyers can operate on so many levels. And the most important role for lawyers is as counselors, as translators, explaining to people, to everyone, the way the law works in society and the way the law can be used for the good of society. Those are incredibly crucial roles, and those roles can be carried out by lawyers at every single level. Lawyers who help people get their Social Security benefits, to lawyers who do international insolvency and work at the very most remunerative level of being a lawyer.
Do you think the role of lawyers in society has changed since you graduated from law school?
I think that law has become the legal profession has become less of a club, and though we've lost something in that, I do think there are many gains, and that we have become more inclusive and brought many more people into the practice of law.
What, if anything, do you believe that women lawyers have added to the legal profession or the legal system?
Well, this is always difficult because I've basically been, there are sameness feminists and there are difference feminists. And the difference feminists, and then there are cultural feminists. The way I like to explain it is sameness feminists say, we're the same. Difference feminists say, we're different. And cultural feminists say, we're different and we're better. I'm more, because I think of my generation, I'm more of a sameness feminist. But at the same time, I have begun to see that there are some generalizations that may apply, and that I think women do seek to find the right compromise more, and less put on the armor and go into the fray. Not all women, not all the time, but I think that it's good that that the legal profession is seeking, for instance, all of the alternative dispute mechanisms that we're working on, and the alternates to incarceration. And women, also men, have been very active in this way. But I do sort of always recoil to generalizations about women.
Do you think technology has changed the legal profession, and if so, how?
Technology has incredibly changed the legal profession. It hasn't given us enough time for reflection. In the old days, the client could call you and send you a letter, and the letter would wend its way to you, and you could read the letter, and the client could call you and say, what do you think? And you'd say, I am drafting a response, and you could draft the response, and it's in the mail, and you have a little bit of time. Now it's the instant message, and the answer is immediate. The clients expect an immediate answer. It does not give you the time for reflection, and I think we all worry about that. We started worrying about it when the fax came into existence and the overnight mail. Now we need to really think about, have we had enough time to think before we hit the send button? What it's done for law faculties is very interesting, or to law faculties. I think for all of us, it's made us more efficient, and that's a good thing. But law faculties throughout the country have emptied out the law schools. They are not at school as much as they used to be, because they can so easily work from home and be more efficient and get more done. And law faculties throughout the country are more productive, and that's a very good thing. They're producing more fabulous legal scholarship. But we all, at all of our schools, sit around and talk about, how can we build community? How can we use this wonderful new technology but still have that feeling of the small community? And it's a real challenge.
What accomplishment in your life are you proudest of?
I am proudest, having come from the background that I came from, that I am still here, that I am intellectually active, that I love life, and all the cards were stacked against me, and I'm the proudest of that, and I'd be proud of it. No, if I were still a legal secretary, I'd be proud of that as well.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine. Are we off? Oh, I still see the light on.
Not yet.